Did I ever tell you folks about the time I replaced one of my player characters with a doppelganger? Greetings gamers, I'm Anto and I've been playing tabletop games for almost 20 years now, and on this channel I make videos on how to be a better dungeon master, how to build deeper worlds, and I tell you tales from my games, so if you're new here make sure to subscribe for more videos just like this. One of my favourite things to do as a dungeon master is to challenge my players' expectations. I love taking classic monsters and giving them my own twist, so that even veteran players are surprised when they come across a new monster. I also love being slightly evil and putting my players into difficult situations. So when the party's elf wizard Ludicrous couldn't attend a session and joked that someone else could just run his twin, Ludicrous, I immediately got an idea. I sent Ludicrous's player a private message saying I had an idea for the future that I thought would be really cool, but that would require him to sacrifice some of his autonomy. I asked if he was okay with that, and he trusted me enough to come up with something dramatic and said yes, so I started planning. Before we go any further, I just want to clarify this isn't going to work for every single table. Your players need to be able to trust you completely to sacrifice their autonomy like this, and that's not something that is to be taken lightly. Now, Ludicrous's player knew that I wasn't going to do anything heinous with the character, and that whatever I had in mind would be dramatic. But if they had said no to this idea would have died. I wouldn't have forced this on my party for my own enjoyment. So anyway, a few weeks later, the party were attending a tournament and trying to gather allies for the rebellion that they were working with to depose the false king, Richard Blackthorne. To be able to speak to all the NPCs they needed, the party had to split up and each player character went off on their own. Ludicrous went to speak to Shade, a masked wizard the party had fought once before and who was claiming to be Ludicrous's estranged father. Because we were short on time that evening, we hand-waved the second half of this conversation between these two characters, and a few hours later in-game, Ludicrous met up with the group and said he was convinced that Shade was his father and that Shade had agreed to help the party. What the party didn't know was that during their meeting, Ludicrous was knocked unconscious and replaced with a doppelganger. Shade had no interest in being an ally to the party and was preparing to betray them under orders of false king Richard Blackthorne. In my setting, doppelgangers assume a mental link with their victim, which allows them to access the victim's thoughts. Usually, a short scan of a person's brain is enough for the doppelganger to assume their identity for a few minutes or a couple of hours, but for a long-term con like this, they usually keep the victims alive so they can keep that mental link open and access deeper and more nuanced memories. So the doppelganger assumes Ludicrous's form, and then the real Ludicrous is taken away to be kept prisoner. But before the doppelganger returns to the party, Shade casts a mind blank spell on them, meaning that as far as the doppelganger was aware, they were Ludicrous. This is an essential part of the plan so that Ludicrous's player could keep running Ludicrous as normal without having to actively lie to the players. And I also didn't tell Ludicrous's player the full details about this plan. I just told them at some point they'd be replaced with a doppelganger and they would remain a doppelganger either until their death or whatever was coming from this story came about, whichever happened first. I intentionally didn't tell them the exact time I planned on replacing them because I didn't want that to impact the way they were role-playing too heavily, and I also didn't know myself at the time. This was a long con, and I was happy to play it out for as long as it took, but as I said before, it relies solely on having that trust from the player. So Ludicrous returns to the party as a doppelganger, and all was well. They spoke to the NPCs they needed to and gathered some important allies for the war effort. They continue adventuring together for another 3 months or more before anything else happened with this particular storyline. And during all that time, Ludicrous's player kept playing him as if nothing had changed, because again, he had no idea that his character was already a doppelganger at this point. So there we are, 3 months after the switch. They arrive in a new city, and shortly after arriving, they decide that they're going to use a crystal ball they had recently recovered from some enemies to try and glimpse into Richard Blackthorne's plans. They reasoned that looking at their enemy might give them some insight and help them plan out their next move. A pretty sound plan. Well, as any of you familiar with the Palantir will know, using a seeing stone can be very dangerous. The group were able to see into the study of Richard Blackthorne, protector of the realm and one of the main villains of the campaign. They could only see a small section of the room, but they could see the false king, Richard, with his wife, Elise, and they were talking. They were talking about how the spy was in place and the plan was progressing nicely. The players were immediately excited and suspicious. They thought they were secretly watching the big bad evil guy talk about his schemes. They noted down that there was a spy and wrote to Balian, the true king, to tell him what they'd seen. They assumed the spy was working against Balian and never even considered that the spy was actually among their own party. Later that session, they visited a fortune teller in that same city who read the bones and the cards, and as part of their reading told them to beware the elf. This, combined with the news about the spy, changed their perception and made them instantly suspicious of Shade, who they were in this city to see. He was an elf after all, they thought he was Ludacris's father. But both of these actually pointed to Ludacris, the elf in their party, who in fact was a doppelganger spy. A few sessions later, the players decided that they would use the crystal ball / palantir again, and when they used it, they saw the big bad evil guy was asleep in his study, alone. And they decided that enough was enough. This was the time. They decided, why wait around gathering allies for a war effort and playing politics when they could just teleport in, grab Richard, and slit his throat? The players were a little hesitant at first. I think they were worried I would be upset they were bypassing content, but I reminded them that they are free to do anything they want in this world. So they hatched a plan. Ludacris would teleport into the study, grab Richard, and teleport him out to a neutral location where the entire party could collectively murderize him. At the level they were at, Ludacris could only teleport 2 people, so Ao, the Azamar monk, volunteered to go with him. Ludacris and Ao teleported into Richard's study, and they knew immediately that something was wrong. The room they were in had no door, and now they were in it. Everything inside was obviously fake. Panicking, they grabbed Richard and teleported away. They didn't even bother to take the cover off him, they just grabbed him and went. This second teleport did not go nearly as well as the first, and they found themselves alone with Richard instead of being in the room supported by the party. Combat begins, and in the opening turn, Richard throws off the blanket, revealing a fully armed and armoured form, and with one swing of his mighty warhammer, he crushes Ludacris, dealing a fatal blow. Ao, in a blind, terrified rage, unleashes her full might on Richard and is able to bring him down just before he's able to kill her as well. As Richard lies on the ground dying, his flesh begins to melt away and his skin becomes pale and formless. He was a doppelganger. Ao barely has time to register what is happening before her eyes when she hears Ludacris's voice calling out for help behind her. As she skids on her knees next to him to try and stabilize him, Ludacris also begins to morph into his original form, and Ao finds herself alone with the bodies of 2 doppelgangers. When the players first picked up that crystal ball that they eventually used to spy on Richard, they didn't use it right away, which gave Richard time to prepare a fake scenario with a pair of doppelgangers to fool the party. The heroes had used scrying before, so Richard knew they were capable of it. Knowing that, he had his doppelganger placed in a sealed, fake room to await the inevitable assassination attempt. Throughout the campaign, anytime my players used abilities publicly, they would find their enemy adjusting their tactics to respond to these powers. This was a really natural way to keep the difficulty increasing throughout the course of the campaign without having to use crazier and crazier monsters. As the enemy gained more intel on the heroes, they were able to prepare more for them. So the real Ludacris was being held in Shade's manor as a prisoner, and the players soon figured out that had happened and mounted a daring rescue to recover their friend. Now, the reveal that Ludacris had been a doppelganger remains one of my absolute favourite moments in that whole campaign. The players lost their minds when they realised what was happening, and it made them incredibly paranoid for months afterwards. When that part of the campaign ended and we recapped our favourite moments, everyone agreed that the doppelganger reveal was one of the top moments in the entire storyline. Now, a lot of the small details and the idea behind this storyline came from the Rebel Flesh episodes of Doctor Who back when Matt Smith was the Doctor. That whole storyline I really enjoyed, and I thought the gangers in particular were absolutely terrifying, and I really wanted a way to bring some of those elements into my campaign. So when Ludacris as player made that joke about someone else playing him and playing Ludacris, that was the perfect excuse for me to be like, I can get a doppelganger in here. Using stories from movies and TV shows and books is one of my favourite ways to generate adventure ideas. I like taking those elements that I enjoy from stories and sort of D&Ding them. and putting them into my campaigns. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. It's something a little bit different from my usual content. If you did enjoy it, please do let me know down in the comments below, and if the video is well received, it's definitely something I will keep doing in the future. Also, if you did enjoy it, don't forget to hit the like button down below because it helps to tell our overlords here at YouTube that this content is worth showing to other people. And if you want to keep watching, I actually have a campaign diary series of my current campaign going over all of my player party's current antics that you can see just here. But until next time, happy gaming.